Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. I know it's cold and icy outside, so I appreciate everyone who came, and thank you everyone who joined us online. We have a really interesting presentation tonight focused on battery storage concepts and opportunities. So it's there's a lot of information here. This is a very casual meeting, so if you have any questions, please just ask. If there are any questions online, please put them in the chat box, and I'll make sure that we get to them by the end. I'm Amy Turner. I'm the CEO of Fox Islands Electric and Fox Islands Wind. We have, this is a joint meeting tonight, so we have directors from both the electric side and the wind side. So I'll do quick introductions. George Kendrick is the president of Fox Islands Wind. John Young is the director for Fox Islands Electric. Doug Green is the vice president for Fox Islands Wind. Chad King is the vice president for Fox Islands Electric. And then over here, Chuck oh my goodness, Chuck Gadzik. I was talking to Chuck earlier today, other Chuck. Excuse me. Chuck Gadzik is here. He is the secretary treasurer for Fox Islands Wind. Patrick Traynor is the president for Fox Islands Electric. Dennis Pratt is director for Fox Islands Electric, and Alan Lazaro, director for Fox Islands Electric. I believe I have everybody. I also have some staff online joining us tonight. So welcome everybody, and let's get started. This is an interesting presentation tonight. So we're going to be talking about battery storage, which is something that Fox Islands Electric does not have. There isn't a utility scale battery on the island. Some of this is new technology, was fairly new technology when we were putting in the wind turbines. So as part of our overall look at generation on this island, transmission distribution on this island, we're looking at battery storage too. And what is energy storage? How should we consider it? Should we consider it? What technologies are available? We've done a case study for Fox Islands Wind that we're going to be presenting towards the end. And then of course, there's always going to be time for some questions. So why are we considering energy storage? What energy storage is basically storing electricity for use at a later time. It also helps balance our grid's energy supply. We get energy from Fox Islands Wind, and we get energy from the transmission line from ISO New England, the energy market in New England. We have a marginal, very small amount of net meter solar that also feeds into our system. And we have a 2 megawatt diesel generator. So those are our sources. Energy storage would balance out those sources. It also provides instant backup power during power failures in a way that right now we do use our diesel generator. If we lose the transmission line in outages, it does take a little bit to get that on. A battery would be something that would provide backup in outages. We could also buy off-peak power for use in later times, and we're going to take a look at how that would benefit us on the islands. And then also to help meet the state of Maine targets for energy storage. So there was bipartisan legislation that was signed into law in 2021. Fox Islands Electric, as part of the consumer-owned utilities in Maine, monitored this bill but took a neutral position on it. But we did follow it to see what opportunities would be available, how battery storage is being perceived, and how it could be implemented in the state of Maine. There is a statewide goal of 300 megawatts of battery storage by 2025 and 400 megawatts by 2030. That would represent 20% of Maine's peak demand. Currently, there is 63 megawatts installed in 6 different locations. So we are quite a ways from our goal. I mentioned this tonight, not because we would consider battery storage as politically that we would want to do. It's because where politics have support, there's usually some financial support and funding and initiatives to get these projects going through the state of Maine, which would help if there's financial support for projects like this in the terms of grants, pilot projects where you can get some of the project funding in exchange for like the data. We are a small island grid out here between the 2 islands. We're a single small grid. That's a great place to do some pilot programs. Where you see political involvement in issues like this, a lot of times there's financial support for projects. So this is part of the reason, not the only reason, but part of the reason that we're looking at battery storage and what possibly the options could be for this area. So to talk about more of the technology piece of it, I'm going to pass it over to George Kendrick, who has done a lot of the research in this area.
Okay, thanks. So I guess one of the things I wanted to start off with was what is energy storage anyway? Because as Amy said, there are a variety of reasons that we want to store energy and use it later. But there's many different forms of energy storage. So there's kinetic and potential energy. There's different ways of storing energy that we can convert back to electricity. So some of you may have heard about pumped storage or pumped hydro, which has been around for a very long time. And that's where during off-peak times or when you have extra power, you would pump water generally to a reservoir that might be on top of a mountain or a hilltop somewhere. And during the day when you have peak demand, you would let that water flow back down and spin turbines at the bottom. And then you would generate the power. So it's sort of like a battery, that it's a way of storing energy, but you're taking the water and increasing its elevation. So you're essentially increasing the potential energy there, and then you're releasing it to flow down at night or in the daytime to generate power. So that's a way of looking at energy storage, not as more as a physical way of storing it. There's also some technologies that the government has been funding exploration of, like kinetic energy of flywheels. And this is a way of taking electricity and spinning very large, very heavy wheels and allowing them to just rotate. And then later, when you need the power, you can put a brake or a generator attached to it and generate power. Those are fairly small scale. Bill?
Well, both of those systems, the water system and that turbine, use energy to be able
They
to
do.
store.
They do. So every time you're converting electricity into some other form of energy, you're losing something. And it doesn't matter if you're transmitting it through our transmission line and we lose 6% each way because of resistance in the wires, or if you're converting it from one form of energy to another, from electricity, for example, into a pump storage situation, you're definitely losing power. But the advantage is that at least you haven't lost all of that. That perhaps there's, I don't know the exact percentages of it, but you're essentially converting one form of energy to another, and there's a cost for that in losing some of the power. So that's a really good point, Phil. So we go to the next slide. There's an example of pumped hydro is typically very large scale. There are projects in Massachusetts, for example, Northfield, Mount Herman area. There's a pump storage project that's been running for decades there. We're talking gigawatt hours kinds of storage. So huge capacity, large reservoirs excavated on the top of hills, large pipelines coming down the mountainside. They're very efficient because you're storing water and you're pumping the water up. But the bad news is that it's environmentally not a terribly friendly way of going. The permitting for these kinds of projects is very complicated now, and the siting is difficult to try and find the right place to do it. Vinyl Haven doesn't really have, or North Haven don't have the kind of vertical relief or large open areas or existing reservoirs that we could use for that. So it's not really an option for us out here, but it is a very large scale potential in other parts of the country. So we come back to batteries as a way of storing power, and we're all familiar with how batteries work. They're generally the most flexible and the fastest response. So it's like power goes out, you turn on a flashlight, you've got instant power from your batteries. There's no delay. And that's one of the advantages for battery storage, is its instantaneous delivery of power. There's no ramping up. The switch goes on, you have your lights back. And the batteries that are available today can go from very small, AAA or hearing aid batteries to gigawatt sized batteries and battery storage systems. So it's a very scalable technology. Next one. So as you can see on the pictures here, we're talking about batteries that range from a smaller scale residential, and many people are familiar with the Powerwall that's made by Tesla, that some people are putting in their houses. We're not going to be talking about those scale of batteries tonight. We are going to be talking about that at the next meeting in conjunction with our discussion of solar, because it's become a very popular add-on to rooftop solar projects. Slightly larger scale ones are commercial scale. We're not going to talk about those tonight because we're focusing on utility scale, but those are becoming very popular in some larger businesses and factories, and places where there's high demand, as a way for them to store power and use it during peak times when they've bought the power during off-peak times. But we're going to be talking about utility scale tonight, which is the much larger ones. Go ahead. So the kinds of technologies that we have available now, we're probably going to be looking at a lithium iron phosphate battery system. These are the technology that's just come out in the last probably 5 to 10 years. We're looking at least a megawatt size battery, probably 1 to 2 megawatts. And we're looking for a 2, 4, or 6 hour duration. Now, what that means is that we want to be able to bridge the gap if there's a power outage and be able to deliver power for a certain number of hours. We also, as we'll talk later, looking at how do we store power that we aren't using. So, for example, if the wind generators are generating power in the middle of the night and we don't need that power, we can store it. We want to be able to deliver that power over a longer period of time, not just turn on the battery and have it get drained in 10 minutes. We need to be able to provide reliable power over a period of hours to both islands. Most of the battery technology that we're looking at comes with a 10 to 15 year warranty. Yeah, we listed 7,000 cycles, and that's about a 19-year life. Realistically, I don't think most battery storage systems go more than 10 to 15 years at most. So I think from a conservative perspective, we'd be looking at a 10-year life, and depends on the amount of charging and discharge. Like if you have a laptop, how long does your battery last? Does it last 20 years? Probably not. But if you hope that it will last at least 3 or 4 years until the next version of a laptop comes out. But it depends on how often you have completely discharged and then recharged that laptop. So if we are using this on a typical utility scale process, you're looking at a 10 to 15 year life for these batteries. And that means we'll have to replace them in that time period. So they don't last forever. The other good thing about the lithium iron phosphate is they have a much lower fire risk than the lithium oxide batteries that were the first generation. So a lot of people have been concerned about these large scale battery systems catching on fire, burning out of control, local fire departments not knowing how to deal with them. Most of that has been addressed. Most of the systems that we're looking at now have 24/7 automated monitoring of temperature and environmental systems. They have built-in air conditioning and sometimes heating units in colder climates to keep everything in a fairly narrow temperature range, and prevent them from spinning out of control in terms of the temperature. I think that's probably the only thing on that one. Okay, so why do we use lithium ion at all? It has the most energy storage per unit weight. That's the technology that we have available today that's the most efficient. It has hardly any maintenance costs. You just turn them on and you let them run, and the monitoring system keeps track of how they're discharging, how they're charging, and you don't really have, there's no moving parts. So they're fairly straightforward. They're also readily available, and the utility scale ones are ramping up in production. So we're starting to see them all across the world, really. And in the United States, they're really starting to take off. So not only are they more available, but the prices are coming down. So that's also a good thing. The more that they become a routine thing used, the prices are starting to stabilize. And the other thing for us that's really handy is they're portable. They're very easy to move. They're easy to install. They show up on a trailer, basically, sort of like a flatbed, but like a bunker's truck.
Yeah, bunkers can bring
Yeah,
them.
right. And so they're easily transported on either the island transporter or on the ferry, probably on the island transporter. And they can be driven right to the site, backed in, dropped down, and they're ready to go. I mean, they have to be plugged in, and there's a few other things to do, but they're basically very easy to move around. They're also scalable so that you could put in one or two to begin with, and if you learned that you needed more later, you simply add another or another after that. And so they're very modular. It's kind of like Legos in some ways, that they can just plug and play, and they're very easy to move around. So talk about safety for a minute again. I mentioned that there's a 24/7 automated system. This evolved over the last decade when they realized that, you know, the environmental conditions of the batteries need to be monitored very closely. They have built-in air conditioners. They might go to that next picture that has them. Yeah. So this is what they look like. Each one of these might be a megawatt. So this is a larger scale one, and there's a big one that just is being installed in Hawaii right now. It's a 185 megawatt system, and it's just acres of these things that are all interconnected. You'll notice that there's a little heat pump air conditioning unit on each one, and these are actually a little older technology. The newer technology ones are even smaller. They're more compact than this, and put out the same amount of storage. So they're fairly easy to move, and they don't take up a lot of room. So I think they're probably much safer than they were 10 years ago. And most of them have automated fire suppression systems built into the container also. So if something happened, and there was I mean, I'm not an engineer, so the technology of the fire suppression, I don't know what it is, but basically lithium iron phosphate systems can be put out with water. So you don't need to have any complicated environmentally unfriendly foam systems or things like that. It's a fairly simple fire suppression system. And all of these now are meeting all the fire codes because fire departments all around the country had been expressing concerns about, can we get the training to understand what we're dealing with when one of these catches on fire? And do we have the technology to be able to put out a fire if something like that occurred? And the answer to that is yes, they've addressed all that. And the fire departments now are comfortable, trained, and able to handle if anything happens. But it's fairly rare for anything like that to happen now.
Second question.
Yeah.
I have two. One, do you have a sense of their efficiency? You talked about water storage system being 72% efficient. These obviously use the loss just in them, but they're also running the air conditioning units and things like that.
Yeah, they're in the 90s.
They're 90.
Yeah, because especially if you don't have a long transmission line going to them, if they're placed somewhere near your generation, you don't have as much line loss going through. And it's like any rechargeable battery, and I'll come back to your laptop again, which is the same kind of technology. It's a lithium battery in your laptop. Particularly when your laptop is new, you're going to end up with a recharge rate that's back up to 99%, and you're not really losing it. Over time, that will degrade, just like it does in any battery. So would it be 90x% 10 years from now? Maybe not. It might be down to 80.
And are there other batteries, cars that have lead acid? Are there other battery types that are competitive other than the?
Not that are competitive. That's the key thing. The price versus technology question. But there's all kinds of new technology being researched. And there's a bunch of new kinds of batteries that are not on the market yet, but they're being evaluated and tested now. There's molten or liquid salt batteries that are another technology, but I don't think they're quite ready for prime time. But we're going to be doing a lot more digging and research into this. This is a fairly high level view. Once we get to the point of trying to figure out, should we do this, they'll be doing a lot deeper dives and a lot more detailed, evaluation of individual technologies. So there's not like we've got a decision at this point.
Two things. One is, I read something the other day that the Chinese have become so successful with their electric cars, and because they're using a different kind of battery. They're not using the high rare earth metals like lithium, like iron and salt, I think.
As I understand it, most of the Chinese systems are the lithium iron phosphate, which is what we think is going to be the one that we'll use. They've been using that for quite a while, and that's penetrated most of their market.
This article didn't mention, but the other thing is,
I'd like to see that.
when you talk about when there are power outages, this would not be if we have local power outages because of fallen trees. It would be a mainland kind of outage. I was wondering what percentage of our outages are from where we're cut off from the mainland.
You'll have to answer.
I don't have an actual percentage, but it is more frequent than I would like. The last 3 storms that we had, we lost mainland power only once. When there's significant storms, there's a good chance that we'll lose power from CMP to our Glen Cove switching station. And when that happens, they have to send a substation tech to get down to the switching station. And so anything that hits the transmission line between Park Street and Glen Cove might trigger that outage. So they are frequent, but the 2 out of the 3 storms were all just trees, branches, winds, that type of thing happening. We had storm winds that second storm, or the first one. There's been so many this year. I actually think it was the first one, where the wind was so strong we actually had some broken poles. So this is not going to back up that in any case. But there's also times where ISO New England will call on us to run our diesel generator, even though we have mainland power. But that's because the resource, the power availability, the price is really high. There's few resources that are running because they've had outages on the mainland. So we would kick up our diesel generator and provide power even if we haven't lost the transmission. But if we have any broken poles, wires, anything like that, we can't provide power to those areas until we have those outages repaired, that damage repaired.
Yeah, I think it's worth repeating though, that when we do lose mainland power, we lose the windmills, even if they're turning.
Yeah.
And so the situation the co-op has been in is that the generator will no longer run both islands.
Yes.
And so that's with the demand that's grown. So that's something we've all experienced over the last year, where the crew is experimenting with how much of the island they can run on 2 megawatts. But I mean, at some point, they're actually rotating through, giving people power for a period of time.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, on the outage side of this equation, that could alleviate that problem.
It would significantly help. Our diesel generator is a 2 megawatt generator, which used to be sufficient to meet both islands. Right now, we are peaking at 2.4 megawatts. And we can really only run the diesel generator very solidly and safely at 1.8. So there are issues when North Haven is 700 to 800 just by itself. So less than a megawatt, but there's not enough to bring them up and Vinyl Haven, or there's enough to bring up North Haven and then town side of Vinyl Haven. And we have to cycle the power between the different areas that we have. A battery would alleviate that, and actually a little later on we'll talk about the outage, like the discharge time frame on a battery. We wouldn't look at anything less than 4 hours, and again that would match it, so we could run the diesel generator and match it with the battery and have quite a bit of time to get those repairs made and reconnect to the mainland. But in and of itself, it's not a complete answer to the outages. We still need to have the mainland transmission. So there's and actually, when we get into the case study part, this is probably a good way to start going into that. What Chuck was talking about is, that our wind is intermittent. So intermittent or variable power, it's only available when that resource is available. So like solar and wind, you're only generating electricity when you have 12 to 13 mile per hour wind speeds, or when the sun is out, and you can actually generate from that resource. It's variable, it's unpredictable, so it's unfirm power is what we call it. You can't depend on it to dispatch it at a moment's notice because you don't know if it's going to be there or not. So variable power requires flexible, predictable, firm energy source to integrate the intermittent power into a system and balance the system load. So even with the wind, if the wind is having gusts, you're having like huge gusts of wind come in and you're having bursts of energy, you need something to stabilize that and match it into your system. So wind, solar, these renewable sources, even hydro, they're not baseload generation. That baseload generation is consistently available when we need it. Our baseload generation on the island is coming from our transmission line from the mainland sources. The diesel generator, as long as we have diesel, and that's why we have an extra storage tank on that, can be baseload generation, but it's not enough to cover both islands. And it's very difficult right now to get a permit to add more diesel to the system because we're moving away from fossil fuels on the system. So looking at batteries can provide that consistent, instantaneous power, adding that to the grid, and it levels things out. So as we're looking at what does it mean? How would we use this battery? The battery stores excess energy that you have. There's very few renewable projects today that don't at least talk about having a storage option with them. So combining the renewable resource with some energy storage. So you use the battery to dispatch the energy, you store it and then dispatch it when it's needed. This is called generation smoothing, or incorporating variable power into the system. So if you have your wind or your solar that has this flow, the green is when you're generating it. The red is when you need the power. Through a battery, you can smooth that out and match your generation with what you need, what your system needs, what your load is. So Fox Islands Wind is a generation company. It generates power. Fox Islands Electric is a transmission and distribution. So Fox Islands Electric really is the delivery side. So Fox Islands Electric, our primary role is to dispatch energy, which means matching our sources of energy that we get to customer use second by second. When you turn on the light switch, you want instantaneous power to power your light. So without knowing exactly who's going to turn on a light switch at what time, or a microwave or a washer or anything on the system, I have to keep a power factor and available energy at all times ready to deliver to you without notice in a moment, in an instant. And when you start using that energy, I need to make sure there's enough energy to keep the power factor level on the system so that the drain on energy from individual customer deliveries is not impacting the overall level of the system. So this dispatching, it's a very careful and concise way of constructing your system to have 100% availability without any notice for any type of load. Our load has been peaking at 2.4 megawatts, but it ranges from, I think, like 800 kilowatt hours up to that 2.4 megawatts. So at any one time, depending on weather, depending on time of day, how many people are here on the island, different things going on, we have to be able to meet that load and meet it instantaneously. So that's where a battery comes in handy. One of the problems that I've discussed quite a bit at annual meetings, yes.
So what's 2.4 megawatts? In other words, is that the amount of electricity that the system can generate over a minute, an hour? Okay.
It,
Repeat the question for the folks.
oh, yes. The question was, what does that mean, 2.4 megawatts? What does that mean at the hour, the moment, the day? What needs to be generated? It means at the time, that is how much energy is flowing through the system being distributed to customers. And there's variations in that as lights go on and off, TVs go on and off, different things like that. But it's that instantaneous delivery, the level of instantaneous delivery. How much power is that? You have to size the system so that you can meet peak plus even extra, and have a reserve and be able to meet even larger than what you think your peak might be. But you have to meet the level of power no matter where it is in your system at any one moment. So it really is a moment by moment exercise. One of the things,
That's usually measured in kilowatts per hour or something like that. I think that's what I heard.
yes, so a megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. So I've been scaling it when I've been talking. So I can actually go back and do that, but I scale it and talk about, because when we're talking about energy and capacity size, we're usually talking about megawatts, but when we're looking at our bills and individual customers, we're usually talking about kilowatt hours. So one of the things that I've talked about a lot at annual meetings and different meetings with Fox Islands Wind and just with the community is why our energy costs are so expensive. A lot of that has to do with our peak power pricing. The wind turbines tend to die down and have a lull early evening into the evening. So that is also on the ISO New England system. When we're buying energy from the system, that's the most expensive time, because that's peak power pricing. That is when people are using the most energy and it's at the most expensive. A battery allows you to do something we call energy arbitrage or peak shaving. It allows you to charge the battery with inexpensive power and then discharge and deploy the battery to offset expensive power. So you can charge it in the middle of the night when it's cheaper, inexpensive power, and then use it from 5 to 9 o'clock at night when your power would otherwise be pretty expensive buying it from the market. So as we look at this, I did a quick case study last week when I was putting the presentation, and I said, okay, what was the cost of energy yesterday? So on January 15th, the cost of energy at 3 a.m. was just a little over 5 cents. The cost of energy at 5 p.m. was 17 cents, 17.68 cents. So a little, about half, 17.5 cents. That is a huge difference in the cost of power. Our wind was producing at 3 a.m. Our wind was not producing at 5 p.m. So if we were charging the battery at 3 a.m., we could effectively have 5-cent power at 5 p.m. by using the power then, instead of buying power off the grid at 17 cents. So let's look at this as a case study. What does this mean for Fox Islands Electric? What does it look like right now with the data we have? What are our options? So we know that our Fox Islands wind turbines are variable. They're variable in the time that they generate and the amount of energy that they generate. They began generating when wind speed is about at least 12 miles per hour. To get a sustained turn of the blades to generate, we have to have at least a consistent 12 miles per hour. Most of our wind is between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. on the island. Fox Islands Electric purchased all of the energy from Fox Islands Wind, but it can only use about 65% of it. The rest of it has to be sold to the market at a loss because we can't use the power here and we don't have any way to store it. So then to have base load generation to match wind speeds and integrate the wind into our system and also provide power for when our wind is not generating, we buy market power through our transmission line to the mainland. This is base load power and it's constant except during an outage when we don't have the access to the transmission line. So possible uses for the battery would be to store 100% of the wind generation instead of selling it to the market. Selling power to the market in 2022 resulted in a net loss of $152,365. Now, how I arrived at this was looking at the exact amount of power we sold, the kilowatt hours, and what it took to replace that exact amount with market power. So we had to sell what we couldn't use, and there's line losses in that. But then we had to replace that power with stuff we bought from the market, and that resulted in a net loss of $152,000. That's significant. We could also charge with wind or inexpensive market power off-peak prices. So we could make sure every evening, overnight, that the battery was charged to be able to be deployed the next day. It would decrease our reliance on the transmission line and market purchases. We would still need the transmission line because that's baseload generation. I'm working with some engineers to try to figure out how we can decouple the wind farm from the transmission line and still use the turbines without the transmission. Even with the battery, the technology is not quite there yet.
Is that what Chuck was talking about?
Yes.
When the transmission line goes out?
Mm-hmm.
It's also interesting to me that the time of day that we get the most wind also pretty much matches the time of day we have to curtail for sound reasons.
Yes, we curtailed 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. every single night. So yeah, that is another factor in decreasing the net generation that we receive from the wind farm. And we have talked about that at prior meetings, and that's definitely a controversial subject that I'm going to sidestep for the purposes of this presentation. But that is the factor as well.
If we
yes.
have to use the battery every day to curtail, doesn't that decrease the life expectancy of the batteries? So you're using them more often? Kind of like the laptop, if you use it all day, every day, the battery's not going to last as long as if you only used it when you actually had to, really needed to use it.
Well, we could, but these are actually made to cycle daily. And going back to George's comment where they are rated now for, to last 19 years or 19, 20 years, the daily cycling really probably makes it about a 10-year asset.
Yeah, and the curtailment is a derating. So the turbines they don't generate their full capacity, but they're still producing power. So I think that's a very important point, is that the curtailment period still is generating power that in the model Amy laid out would still be charging the battery. If the turbines were completely shut off, there wouldn't be anything to charge the battery with at night. But that's not the case. So I don't think it would cause any excessive degradation of the battery capacity. They've already modeled this, and it's built into the plan of how many cycles you could go through for it to last 19 years. And I don't think that would be an issue.
So also, I want to add on to what George said a little bit. Even if we didn't have the wind farm, but we had a battery and we were charging it with 3-cent power and we were going straight with the market, we could still peak shave every single day and not be buying expensive market power during peak times. So this would also decrease our transmission line losses, which are about 6 to 9% each time we cross. It would be paired with our diesel generator, would supply both islands during outages for the duration time of the battery, which, depending on how we were discharging it, could be like 4 to 6 hours of time to match the diesel. And it gives us possible integration for community solar for summer peak uses. We are going to talk about solar generally, solar, community solar, net metering at the next meeting, which is March 4th. And that is going to be a really important conversation as well, that I encourage you all to attend. So we'll talk a lot about that. But as we look at any of these, we're really, you can't look at them isolated too much, because your system, your generation system has many different factors: the transmission, the wind, solar, the solar that's on our system, the diesel generator, all of it together. So what does this actually look like in terms of numbers? So I modeled basically the averages from 2022. So the blue is the wind generation. And what this looks like is, this is above the red line. The red line is our load. This is how much energy we needed to serve our customers throughout the day. So Fox Islands Wind, that was the energy that sold to the market. And this is when we purchased from the market. It's during the most expensive time. So if we look at this is the energy we sold for 5 cents in January 15th, 2024 numbers. This is the energy we purchased at 17 cents. It's pretty significant. Even if that time during the evening, even if that didn't fully cover all of our load during the peak power pricing, it would offset a significant portion of that. So what a battery does is it takes those peak times and allows you to discharge that battery when you need it. So it would smooth out our curve, so we could meet our load with our assets here on the island. So basically, this is just the opposite. The excess wind generation charges the battery, and then the stored energy is used during peak periods. So essentially, in a nutshell, in a very simplistic level, what a battery does. We, as we're looking more into this, how you would use the battery, would you discharge it at the full amount? Would you try to match it? You try to match it with your wind resources coming in so that you could still use the wind. There's also different things that you could do. If the price of power was pretty expensive on the mainland, you might want to discharge your battery at a different time and sell that wind. If you're generating wind, sell that wind, make some money on that wind using your battery to serve your load. In the wintertime, we have a lot of opportunities to do that because we have a lower load here on the island, and because there are less people here, and depending on the weather outside, it'd be very windy, but we have mild temperatures, so we don't have a huge load. We have a lot of wind. We sell that wind to the mainland now. If we could charge the battery overnight with that wind, we could continue to sell all of that wind during high price times using our battery when we needed it. There's different ways to use a battery to get the power costs down and make the energy use more efficient. So going back to 2022, our average cost of energy, just generation, was 18 cents a kilowatt hour. Pretty pricey.
Why is it 18 cents?
So that 18 cents overall average was the market power we purchased and the Fox Islands wind power we purchased. And actually, although a small amount, the diesel generator fuel during outages, the fuel costs are put into this number as well. If we took that and all we did was use the battery to store the excess wind generation, this is what it looks like. That $152,000 equates to a 2-cent reduction in power costs, which is significant. And that's only using a battery in one way, to store the wind energy and keep it on the system and dispatch it when we need it. So it would take that average cost of power down to about 16 cents.
So on the average bill, how many, what is it, 500, if you did 500?
That would be $10.
$10 a month
Mm-hmm.
saving.
Yeah, $10 a month off your bill. So let's get down to that. What does this actually mean? And this is the crux of this whole conversation tonight. Right now, a 2 megawatt battery costs about $4 million. That $4 million includes the sourcing of the installation, the commissioning, and getting it up and going. There are purchase and own options, but then there's also as service arrangements. And the as service arrangement, somebody else would own it and you would pay them to manage it, and you would get just a percentage of the savings. And they would do a cost saving, they would make money from those cost savings that you're realizing from the battery. So either way, you have to have someone to manage the battery, the dispatch, the SCADA system, and you have someone operate it. So the potential annual savings from a conservative standpoint with this: decreased line losses, transmission cost savings, wind energy use, incorporating all our wind in our system, off-peak power use. So switching, charging a battery with off-peak to use it during peak, and saving money on ISO New England, the market capacity charges. Conservatively, we have about savings about $560,000 a year. That means on a 10-year life, you have 8 years at 5% interest to break even on cost versus savings. So those extra 2 years of operation, that's the money that you would use to pay someone to operate it. So the way I'm looking at it right now with the cost, it breaks even. So why would you do all of this to buy it and implement it if you're not going to save anything and you're going to come out with zero? The cost of batteries is decreasing. When I did the same calculation in 2021, the cost of batteries was about $3.5 million, and we would only save 2.8. So as you're looking at energy costs and the cost of batteries falling, we're now at a break-even position, which from my perspective, I am managing these companies, but this is not my decision to make. Our board of directors are the ones that make these decisions. But my recommendation is to not do anything that's not, it's going to be a net savings of zero. To me, it doesn't make financial sense. When I went back to the beginning of the presentation, though, we talked about how there are financial incentives that are following this. There's financial support for these projects. When you look at some of these grant opportunities, low interest loan opportunities, and from the Inflation Reduction Act, there is a direct pay income tax incentive. Fox Islands Electric and Fox Islands Wind are nonprofit community-owned cooperatives. So we don't have a federal tax burden. So we can't, before that, we couldn't take advantage of federal tax breaks, the 30% federal tax break for these projects. Through the change of law with the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a direct pay tax incentive. So you can actually get money from the IRS, even though not to offset tax, but a direct pay. So now that 30% comes into it. There are grant opportunities out there where it's a 25% grant, and then you take the 30% off of what's left for the income tax, and then you can finance the rest at a 2% loan. If we can get it down to where it's feasible through some of these avenues, we could realize these savings. Right now, I think we're at a crossroads of break even. I can see and I know from all these white papers how other utilities are doing the peak shaving, how it's balancing the power on their system. It's helping them in outages. There are a lot of non-monetary benefits to have batteries on your system, but I don't think that's enough to just break even on a project like this. Yes.
I have a question, it might be something that I know, but once the life expectancy is up, there's going to be a cost in disposal.
Mm-hmm.
That's in the future, you don't know what that costs. So is that thought, I mean, is that been brought into consideration as far as
what the cost modeling is? Yes, it has to be. It because the battery itself, the battery fluid, the materials in there are going to have to be disposed of safely. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to do a project where I mean, we're looking at those costs on today's kind of estimating what it might cost in the future. You don't want to do a project where you're really just going to break even. And although you might want to, if there are not other non-monetary benefits to do it. Looking at our energy costs here and the rising costs that we're looking at, I'm not comfortable recommending this unless there is an economically feasible path forward. And that's what this team is looking for and evaluating. Yes.
In the science news, there's new battery discovery, development, research almost every week. And so it reminds me of like buying LED lights in the early 2000s. If you just wait 6 months, you can get the same, something better, cheaper. And so, it may be a matter of time of waiting to see.
When is the right time?
Yeah.
Well, actually, I can honestly say that looking at the same type of battery system 2 years ago, it wasn't even in consideration economically. But waiting a little while, the technology is more developed, it's more readily available, the price is coming down, there are new things coming on the market. All of these things are considerations that we have to keep in mind.
You know, in these numbers, and you haven't, I mean, part of it is crystal ball and what peak power is gonna cost over the next 10 years.
Yes.
And you haven't built anything in for something above and beyond what we've experienced.
No, in fact, I lowballed that.
And that's probably one of the most important pieces.
Yes,
right?
it is. But conservatively, I feel like our numbers have to be realistic, almost in a worst case scenario. But the off-peak power use and switching this, all of this is depending on generation variables too. How much is the wind farm going to produce? Are we going to add on considerable more solar? What is peak power costs? What are they going to rise to? Like, what is natural gas going to do on the market? On this island alone, what is our load going to look like in 5 years, in 10 years? How is it going to change? Are we going to, as a community, increase dependence on electricity? Are we going to see more and more electrification? Are we going to see more seasonal homes and less year-round use? How are we as a community going to use energy in the future, and what is that energy going to cost? And a lot of that is, we do need a crystal ball.
Well,
We're estimating.
Environmentally, it's also true that peak power is by far the dirtiest power that's out there.
Mhm.
That's when all the nasty stuff comes online. Electricity. So I think from an environmental standpoint, the more you peak shade, there's an environmental positive side of it
Mhm.
as well.
Well, the very first meeting we had, and we were talking about costs and how performance had been, I think the conclusion from that was the more power we could generate on the island, the cheaper it would be in the long run,
Mhm.
partly because of the line losses. That if we've got 6% coming and going and a 12% loss, it's better to generate as much as we can on the island through whatever means make the most sense. Unless the crystal ball that you have is better than anyone else's, and the price of natural gas is going to collapse and peak power prices are going to get cut in half on the mainland, then all bets are off if that happens.
Well, the world's such a stable place.
I know.
Yeah.
One other thing, as far as the finances go, you talked about, hundreds of thousands of dollars of savings in 8 years to break even. But how does that translate, or do you have a number for how much that translates to monthly bills?
Well, right now, it wouldn't translate to any saving, because pretty much all the savings that we get from it would be going to debt load and management of the resource.
But
So-
increase?
Oh, no increase to, well, maybe not. That's something that I'd have to look That's part of the numbers for the load study and where we anticipate power costs going. It could stabilize rates. It might not save us money, but it might stabilize rates over time. So that's an interesting thought. Yeah.
Wouldn't, whether we have batteries or not, wouldn't time of use pricing also contribute
Mhm.
potentially to peak shaving? As
Yes.
well? I mean, especially with like programmable appliances now that you can basically have them run at, you know, programming that when the windmills or when the wind turbines are producing the most power, or solar if we have it during the day.
Yes. So Fox Islands Electric just installed in 2023 a new metering system. And this metering system will actually give us the technology and the data that we need to craft and implement demand rates, time of use rates, all of that. We encourage people to shift their energy use away from that peak time. But this might be a way to incentivize that and to actually put a rate in place. So once we have a year of data on the new metering system, that's when we're going to be digging into that rate making and really looking at that. So that will probably be sometime in 2025. But that is something that we would like to work on, especially if we're going to look at increased electric vehicles on the island. We would really like people to shift that to be charging them at night and program that to come on at 1 or 2 a.m. and not on that peak power pricing. It really does make a big difference what our load is at that peak period, how much we're all spending on power collectively.
Right.
Yes.
Completely different angle. I'm probably not this meeting, but in reading the literature, other countries that have major renewable energy wind and so forth, we put in gas turbines that would instantly reduce would reduce megawatts. Because the, in order, so it's the other side of the battery. Right? So, maybe sometime we'll talk about that.
Well, that's exactly how we use the transmission line. ISO New England is about 66% natural gas, and they integrate a lot of the renewable energy using a natural gas turbine. So that transmission line, a lot of that power that we receive from the market to match our wind and integrate our winds into it is from a natural gas source. And their power mix vacillates. I watch a lot. They have real-time power pricing and energy mixes on their website that you can watch. But natural gas has been a fundamental piece to provide baseload power to be able to integrate renewables. From our small scale here, a battery will do that, but not as long as natural gas will. As long as you have a supply of natural gas, you can match that. The battery is going to be limited, but in some ways it will operate very similar to be able to integrate that power efficiently. So just to sum this up, oh yes, sure.
You talked about the Affordable Care Act and giving direct payments in lieu of a tax break.
The Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah,
But not for the-
that's okay.
If there were a private company that owned batteries, would they not also have the advantage of depreciation?
They would.
And so my question is that if someone with deep pockets came along and said, let me buy you a couple batteries, couple megawatts of battery, and I will sell you the power and get the tax advantage and the depreciation.
It's called profit for them.
The question was specifically to if a private company came in, would they be able to take care or take advantage of the tax credits? And they would. And would they be able to take the depreciation and the financial risk and the expenses to offset profits and all of that? They would. And that would provide a portion of the profit for an as profit endeavor. That would be a right here where I have as a service arrangement, entering into a contract where we didn't own it, but it was cited here and it was used for our system and operated for us. And there would be a savings, there would be some kind of formula in the contract for how much of the savings would pass on to us, or what we would pay for the services and how the cost of the services would offset savings. I haven't really dug into the formulas and how those contracts work. We wouldn't, perceivably, we wouldn't be getting the full value of the savings ourselves, but we also wouldn't be taking all the risk of ownership. So it is something that we need to evaluate.
At the end of the day, the numbers are gonna really depend on the ability of getting the grants you're looking at.
The grant funding and the income tax and the cost and how the technology is priced and the coming down price, it's really, Don is right. At the end of the day, is this going to be an economically feasible project in any way for us? And if the numbers look really good, shifting that ownership and just having a contract as service agreement with the battery owner operator that operates it for our benefit, and we pay for that service and reap a portion of those savings, that might be the way to go. At this time, I don't know. At this time, I think that the economics just kind of look like it's we really aren't economically going to get a benefit one way or another. It's going to be, we're going to get out what we put in. And so really at the crossroads right now, we need to find a way to make it economically feasible for this community to take that risk and to take on that investment.
Part of the risk that you may model the possibility of a change of administration that basically kills the benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act, like
Yes.
tax breaks.
There are lots of risks. There are risks with the grant funding, that there a change in administration, that money might not be appropriated for this. The tax benefits might not be there. We do have to remember though that it's Congress and whoever is in the executive branch not working together, working together. However that works.
Yeah, I should have said maybe
yes.
All three branches.
It really, yeah, there's definitely a risk. Right now, these types of projects have political support here in the state of Maine and also federally. In the future, it's really anybody's guess on whether they will or not. So right now, I think we're looking at it less of a political animal and more of looking at our whole generation holistically, all of the integrated components. What is going to make the most economic sense, but also building a strong, reliable source of energy here on the island? And how do we do that? How do these pieces fit together? This is really not just a single discussion. We're breaking them down and looking at each of these technologies separately and talking about them as a community, but it really is a holistic approach that we're taking. So if this was a possibility, economically, we're looking at a way forward. We do already have a possible battery site located near the Fox Islands wind farm. This is close to transmission access to the substation. The facilities are already there for the wind farm, so the integration into the system would be more cost effective because the facilities are already there. Up near one of the turbines, there's actually a rock kind of ledge there, so we wouldn't need to clear trees, we wouldn't need to do earthwork. It's already basically a rock pad there that you could site something like this, which is really good because environmentally it's going to have very little impact to locate it there, and the transmission facilities are already there to do it. So that is probably our preferred site for integrating this into the system if it were a path forward. So during the March 4th meeting, we're going to discuss solar generation and net metering, which is another piece of this holistic approach. And in April, we're going to talk about the estimated load growth and what Fox Islands Electric is going to need to supply its customers. And basically through all of this, look at the integrated components, determine the overall cost and impact to the electric grid, and look for ways to find the best way forward for these communities. And we know we're starting at, we understand that the cost of electric out here is high. Some of that is unavoidable. We're on an island. It costs me a lot more to bring a pole over and install a pole than it does on the mainland. There are just certain things that living on an island, it's going to be more expensive. But how can we use the resources that we have in the best way possible and make decisions going forward to find ways to stabilize those costs, to take advantage of things that can make our system more efficient, to better integrate renewables? How do we do that? This is just part of that conversation, and it's an ongoing one, and I hope that you'll join us for the next meeting. I appreciate all of the work, especially that George has done on this, really digging through. There's a lot of information out there. We've talked to vendors. We're really digging into this. It's a lot, and it's wonderful to have a supportive board that's really helping in this effort. So I think I might have a question on chat. Are there any other questions in the room? So this question is, how does the use of locally generated wind power depend on the mainland system? Because the wind is intermittent, we need a base load generation to integrate it. We need a consistent source of energy to flatten it out and pull the wind into our system to match our wind to get an appropriate power factor going through our substation. So without going back to Chuck's comment, without the transmission line right now, we cannot run the turbines asynchronously. Get that word out. They can't operate without that baseload generation matching them and feeding into that power. There is some technology that's developed that possibly can do that, but the GE turbines cannot at this time. Now, the battery is not going to be enough to do that. We are trying to model, well, is the diesel generator enough to get a consistent power source enough to get one turbine up and then enough to integrate the others. The problem again is with the wind being intermittent, you can't guarantee a consistent source of wind. And there are some weather conditions you can do that for a certain amount of time, but not long enough to consistently use them without the transmission line. Are there any other questions online or in the room? Any other comments? Okay. Thank you all. It's been a good discussion.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening.
But it was for- But-
So 15 or 20 minutes.
I thought-